So it turns out, yes, in fact, the church year begins with Advent, not Christmas, not Easter. It's odd, but it is. And year B means that we're starting to look at Gospel of Mark for the next year. Gospel of Mark, for the record, Greek audience as the original audience. And say when I say Greek, what you should be thinking is that means that it's a Gentile audience. It's not Jewish, not the original Christians, not the first Christians, not the disciples and their family. These are people who were converts to Christianity, second generation, and they needed to prove themselves as Christians. They were foreigners to this religion, and the original Christians, Jewish converts to Christianity, or Jewish people that also believed in Jesus, were pretty skeptical about them at first. They didn't look Christian. They didn't talk Christian. So the great news is that Mark is a great gospel for people that don't come from a cultural assumption of Christianity, people that don't have, tens, if not hundreds of generations of their family being Christians, people that had to question the idea or expand the idea of what it looks like to be a Christian. That's the Gospel of Mark. So we're going to be talking about that a lot more this year, as opposed to the Gospel of Matthew, which we kind of didn't really talk about a lot last year, because the Gospel of Matthew is written for people who are the established Christians. They are the people that argue about really silly things, like, I don't know, could you be a Christian if you didn't look like us? That's what the Gospel of Matthew is written about and to, and that's part of why it's a little problematic for people, especially people in Hawaii, who have at some point in their recent memory a story of conversion, a story of not being Christian and then becoming Christian and having to look Christian, having to act Christian. That is Matthew. This is Mark. So welcome to year B. Year C will then be the Gospel of Luke, and Gospel of John is sprinkled in throughout all 3 years. This week is also the first week of Advent. It's a week that, for some Christian traditions, has been associated with preparation for the birth of Christ by a study of the idea of hope. So we're going to talk about that. And for the first 4 weeks of Advent, or for the first 4 weeks of the 4 weeks of Advent for the Giving Circle, just to note that we're doing these shorter studies, which means that, oh my gosh, I've got 17 minutes. They're going to be meditations, so more, not really studies. They're going to help us get ready for Christmas. And they're going to be ways to just be a bit more thoughtful about Christmas, a bit more meaningful. So some ways to just be able to get out of the frenzied season of shopping and spending money and getting more stuff that's supposed to somehow fill our deep needs for relationship and community and meaningfulness, which, doesn't really work. So let's think about these things. But we don't really have time to go into passages for each week. So this is going to basically amount to me making really provocative statements for 17 to 30 minutes, and then just letting that sit for a while. So I apologize for that. But let's talk about hope. And that's really odd, because the gospel and the Hebrew passage today basically talk about the end of the world. Next slide. So can I get a reader for the gospel passage from Mark 13?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
But in those days, after that time of distress, the sun will be darkened, the moon will lose its brightness, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the promised one coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Then the angels will be sent to gather the chosen from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. Take the fig tree as a parable. As soon as its twigs grow supple and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, know that the promised one is near, right at the door. The truth is, before this generation has passed away, all these things will have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But as for that day or hour, nobody knows it, neither the angels of heaven nor the only begotten, no one but Abba God. Be constantly on the watch, stay awake. You do not know when the appointed time will come. It is like people traveling abroad. They leave their home and put the workers in charge, each with a certain task, and those who watch at the front gate are ordered to stay on the alert. So stay alert. You do not know when the owner of the house is coming, whether at dusk, at midnight, when the cock crows, or at early dawn. Do not let the owner come suddenly and catch you asleep. What I say to you, I say to all, stay alert.
Thank you very much, Pastor Wade. So this gospel passage is known in Mark's gospel as Jesus's eschatological sermon. It happens after Palm Sunday. It's during the week of Passion. So it seems like it might be more like an Easter sermon, but it's put here. It is the last public speech that Jesus makes in the Gospel of Mark before the Passion narrative like really begins in earnest with Jesus's anointing in Bethany. And when I say eschatological, that's just a really fancy way of saying end times. And similar words to this speech are given also in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke. So it's not one of those things that only appears in one Gospel. And they both also appear in approximately the same position right before the Passion narrative. I can only surmise that the point here for us, the people that wrote the Rise of Common Lectionary, is for us to enter back into the Advent story of the first coming of Christ by finding ourselves with Jesus's followers at the end of his life, expecting his second coming. The signs of the time in which to expect Jesus's reign are given earlier in this same chapter, though they are conveniently omitted in this lectionary, and the passage overall has a vaguely apocalyptic tone, seeming to foretell the end of time. So in verse 29, the things that we look for that are the references, those are, let's go to the next slide. Signs of the end times. Great. Number one, destruction of the temple. No stone shall be left unstoned. That happens in 70 CE. False prophets claiming to be Jesus. That is generally going to be true all the time. Wars and rumors of war. That begins in 66 CE with the first Jewish revolt. Earthquakes, 50 CE and 63 CE. Famines, late 40s CE. Persecution of Jesus's followers. I don't know why not. I guess it always happens. Desolation, sacrilege. That's a really weird thing. That doesn't really make sense if you're not in the know. That is when Emperor Caligula set up an image, a statue of himself on the altar in the temple, which is the sacrilege of setting up a human altar image or a human idol in the Jewish temple. That happens in 40 CE. So the crazy thing to note is all these things came to pass, which you might really marvel at and say, wow, this was really accurate prophecy, except for the fact that we think that the Gospel of Mark was written after 70 CE, essentially after all these things actually had happened. So this is not prophetic. This is backwards looking. This is historical. So this puts people, we need to understand, let's go to the next slide, that when people first heard this, the original audience of Mark, they were not saying, oh, wow, like, look, someone got this all right and predicted all this stuff. They were saying, that has brought us up to the present period, that has retold to us everything that has already happened. So they're not going to pay attention to that as future prophecy. They're going to pay attention to that as being, okay, then what happens next? So it kind of draws your attention to things like verse 31 and also verse 33. The important stuff is about now what? The now what is things are really bad. The worst thing possible that could have imagined, like the thing that we were told would never happen, the destruction of the Jewish temple, the Holy of Holies, the place where God lives on earth, is gone. But my words will not pass away. But be constant, be awake. You do not know when the time will be. This is language that draws us not to the future, this might seem from our perspective, because we don't know history very well, to talk about the future. But in fact, it brings the people, the original audience of this passage, to the present. And what this means is that it's an indication that, and the thesis for today that I'm going to now make in the next try to make in the next 7 minutes, is that hope is formed in the present. Hope, the type of hope that's talked about in the Bible, is not a hope that's projected into the future. And the types of hope that we do talk about in the future, in the vast future especially, like for end times, like this passage might seem to talk about, the apocalypse, the end of the earth, the coming of God. Those are hopes that are oftentimes used by very poor-meaning leaders to manipulate people to do what they want them to do. It makes us dupes. It also makes us look like fools. It's not the type of hope that tells us, what should we do now? How do we actually make the world a more hopeful place? How do we make the world a place that is actually supposed to conform to the image of God? So hope is an action. Hope is a verb. It's something that we're called to do now. And it actually realizes real results. It's not something that causes us to lose touch with the present reality and only look to the future. It's actually something that causes us to look around. So let's go on to another kind of strange connection that the lectionary makes, because we also think that that's forward-looking, but it actually puts us back to the present. Let's go on to the next slide. Prophets. Prophets tell us about the future, right? They are essentially walking fortune cookies. Not quite, although they do get broken in two often. Prophets, correctly understood, especially in the Hebrew scriptures, are people that call us to be aware of the present. They speak to individual times. They speak to leaders. They speak to problems of their present day. This is a quotation from Isaiah that tells that's essentially at Isaiah's call at the very beginning of the book, when Yahweh tells Isaiah what Isaiah is to tell the people. And God's message to the people is, keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of the people dull and stop their ears and shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and comprehend with their minds and turn and be healed. So the question of what do our prophets supposed to do is probably counterintuitive to what we expect. They don't tell the future. They spoke to the present day and their times, and they largely arose and they died with the historical period of the monarchy. If they worked for the king, they spoke against foreign nations. If they were not paid off by the king, then they criticized the king. But it's not our fault if we're surprised here, because the way that the prophetic books were edited, it makes it seem as if they were preaching the covenant, the law, and their message was to keep the law, and if you break the law, then repent and then be forgiven. That's what the books are edited to seem like. But if you actually look at the words of the oracles themselves, like we have here, then you get a different picture. The facts are that the oracles predate the Torah. So the idea that the prophets were there to tell you to follow the Torah couldn't possibly be true, because prophets like Amos and Isaiah and Ezekiel all happened before the Torah, before the law was even written. So they couldn't be telling you to keep the law that was not yet written. So when we look at the oracles themselves, the purpose of prophetic preaching is so that people know, and that's from Ezekiel, so that the people have no excuses. They can't claim ignorance. It's to put the judgment on record. And what's going to happen is going to happen. Oftentimes, they are not preaching for the purpose of averting divine judgment. By the time they give their oracles, it's already too late. The enemy is at the gates. A good analogy of what prophets' jobs are is the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. And that is probably scary for all of us, because we think that prophets are warnings. They're They're the parent saying, don't go too close to the edge. You know what's going to happen next. No. The prophet is correctly more the parent at the edge of the cliff with their arms crossed saying, I told them so. That's actually what the Hebrew image actually is. Let's go on to the next slide. So let's look at a specific prophet that also shows up in our lectionary this week. It's Isaiah. Oh, 1 minute. Great. So this is Isaiah and the family tree of David. Notice that it ends. That's the important thing. So the passage that we have today is from part of the book of Isaiah that we call Third Isaiah. It isn't written by the prophet Isaiah. Chapter 1 through 39 of the book is the original composition. We don't know if that's actually written by Isaiah either, but it's attributed to one author from a time before the Babylonian exile, during the reign of King Ahaz. And the reason that the crisis that caused that prophet to speak, to prophesy, to speak on behalf of God was a pending attack from the Assyrian Empire, and it was part of the Syro-Ephraimite War. And the prophecy given in that section is that even though there are enemies at the gates and your doom seems inevitable, look for a sign that you will not be destroyed utterly. The sign is a young woman will give birth to a child, and a child will be named Emmanuel. That young woman, the word in the Hebrew Bible is Alma. It's not Betula. And these words are important because Alma, correctly translated, is a word for young woman. And there's a separate word in Hebrew for virgin. It's translated as Parthenos in Greek, and that gets translated as Virgo in Latin for our English, sorry, American, our English virgin. But the RSV is the first English translation that correctly understands and doesn't pull its punches and corrects the mistake that the word here in Isaiah is not predicting a virgin. And moreover, the verb is in the present tense. It's not a virgin will conceive. It's that a virgin is already in the present pregnant. So this is predicting the birth of a child that has already been conceived. It is not a prediction of the Messiah. It is rather not a prediction of Jesus. Sorry, let me take that back. It is absolutely a prediction of the Messiah. It is not a prediction of Jesus born of a virgin woman. It should be noted that when the RSV published in the 20th century corrected this and changed the word virgin to young woman, that the RSV book, by translation of the Bible, was burned. And I've got great pictures of that because people had not predicted, not so surprisingly, white evangelical ministers from the South were incensed that we might, in any way take away their worship of virgin women. So the prediction largely came true. The prediction was that there would be another ruler. The language that Isaiah uses of a son of God, coming from the stump of Jesse, we think that perhaps Josiah might be the prediction there, in that Josiah's father was killed, and so the stump of Jesse, a shoot might come from the stump of Jesse. The Son of God language is also normal. It's not something that predicts Jesus as well, because we need to understand that at that point in time, Israel still was heavily influenced from a period of time in which it was ruled by Egypt. And in Egyptian king religion, God language, the king is a son of God. And even more importantly, the language surrounding the ascent of a monarch to the throne, when a monarch became king, not when a monarch was born, is the language of birth. It's not a language of adoption. So a king being born would have been understood to the audience of Isaiah as being a royal coronation. And in fact, Ahaz was not the last king of Judah. There was another king born and who ascended to the throne. And that's perfectly in accordance with the prophecy. It happened already. So the idea that this would be the messianic prophecy of first Isaiah was something that was not realized, that people would be waiting hundreds of years to be realized only under Jesus, is completely a Christian fiction that is really not just disrespectful to the historical context or the lived experience of Jews of the 6th century, it's also just completely fiction, and makes us look sort of foolish. Great. But that's not the really important part. The important part is that if we only assume that Isaiah is talking about a future Messiah, we miss the important part, which is God's reassuring message that even in the midst of the worst calamity of certain destruction and death, it's the promise that life will go on, that trust God, do not be afraid. And this is, if anything, the Christian message of hope. It's not that a future savior, the end of the world, the new earth, will make all of this present mess worth it. It's that even today, right now, even with the mess that we have, life will go on. Okay, so what we've got today, though, for our passage is not in 2nd Isaiah, which is from chapters 40 to 55. It's in 3rd Isaiah, which spans from 56 to 66. The reason that we divide Isaiah into 3 sections like this is that it was realized that the historical context of the book of Isaiah spans such a large number of years, over 200 years, that it would be ridiculous to assume that one prophet was alive for this period of time. If you need to believe that Isaiah was one person that wrote the entire book, then you're suddenly required to believe in lifespans above 200 years. You've entered the phase of fable and myth, and we're no longer having the same discussion anymore anyway. We're talking about something else. So we've just agreed that for rational discussion, to be able to have a critical dialogue, that we need to divide Isaiah into several books, and the current consensus is somewhere between 2 and 3. One of the main features of Zion, and the reason we have this picture, or of Isaiah, and the reason we have this picture is the idea of Zion. Zion is a geographic feature. It is a mountain in Jerusalem. It is the location of the original fortress that the mythic David, it is the original mythic location of the original mythic fortress that the mythical character David mythically conquered and set up the mythical kingdom house of David in. The important part is that it is used synonymously, Zion, as being the same as Jerusalem, as being the same as Israel, just as we talk about the White House as being synonymous with Washington, D.C. They're just terms that are used for each other. But Zion theology is the main point of Isaiah, and it's this promise from God that Jerusalem will be eternal and that there will always be a king from the line of David ruling over Jerusalem. Which is funny, because when you look at this tree of the line of David, you see that it ends. And that's a problem, because after the exile, there are no more kings in Jerusalem. And about 4 generations after the last recorded descendant of David, in fact, we lose the genealogy of David entirely. No one has any idea who even belongs to the house of David, which makes it sort of funny when Jesus comes about and the Gospels of Luke and Matthew claim that there's an unbroken lineage connecting Jesus to David. Sort of kind of paralleling those problems is the problem of the genealogies themselves. We know that the 2 genealogies don't correspond. In one genealogy, there are 27 generations between David and Jesus. In another genealogy, there's 42. The 2 genealogies don't agree on the fatherhood of Joseph. And later church fathers attempted to explain this by saying that Joseph had 2 fathers, which is funny in 2023, but less funny when you actually have to try to take this stuff seriously. The point is that the truth of the historical matter is that the lineage of David ended, and it means that Davidic theology, Zion theology, runs into a problem of how do we make sense of the promises to keep someone from the house of David on the throne? The way to do that from the Christian perspective was to reinterpret Isaiah. And we did that in many problematic ways. And this is why it's a problem to think that Isaiah is talking about the Messiah that is realized in Jesus. Not to say that Isaiah was not talking about Messiah, it's to realize that the Messiah that Isaiah was talking about was literally an anointed king, and a king that did actually occur historically. And it's something like King Hezekiah, King Josiah, something like that. It's something that was realized, that's done. It is not an open-ended prophecy that is still looking for its realization in Jesus. Here's some of the problems. For example, to be able to fit Jesus into prophecy, Micah's prophecy in chapter, I think, 5, verse 2, that Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. To be able to meet that prophecy, Jesus, who is known to be a Galilean, the gospel writers created the story in the Gospel of Luke of the census to make Jesus go back to Bethlehem, or Jesus' parents to go back to Bethlehem so that Jesus could be born in a manger in Bethlehem because of a census. No census like this ever occurred. No census ever. There was no empire-wide census ever in the Roman Empire. There was no census under Emperor Augustus. The census that did occur was in the wrong year. It was in 6 CE, so it would have happened after Jesus was born, under Quirinius, but it didn't apply to people from Galilee. It was a census of Judea, and unfortunately, Galilee is outside of Judea, so it wouldn't have applied to Jesus. And think about this, just as a thought exercise. How economically disruptive would it be in 2023 if everyone had to return to the place of their birth to be counted? And we had planes and boats and cars and trains. It would be really disruptive. It would mean that the economy of the world would shut down, or at least of a country would shut down for days, weeks, months, as everyone went back to where they were born. Imagine doing that in the Roman Empire before trains, planes, or cars existed. It just really doesn't make any sense at all. The point being that people, Christians, gospel writers, will do foolish things to make prophecies seem as if they had come true if we assume that Jesus must fit into the prophecies of the Old Testament. Just like the virgin birth, just like that. And we will miss the point of it. It's not just that we shouldn't do this because we lose something. It's that we miss out on looking at Jesus' life, that it is different, that it doesn't predict a king, that it isn't about royal power, that it's about the sick and the poor and the lonely and the hungry. Anyway, let's go on to the next slide. So Isaiah. This is the passage that we've got for this week. And can I have someone read this quickly?
I'll read it.
Thanks.
Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, that the mountains would shake before you. As fire kindles the brushwood and the fire makes water boil, make your name known to your adversaries and let the nations tremble before you. When you did awesome things that we could not have expected, you came down, and the mountains quaked in your presence. From ages past, no ear has ever heard, no eye has ever seen any God but you, intervening for those who wait for you. Oh, that you would find us doing right, that you would be mindful of you in our ways. You are angry because we are sinful. We sinned for so long. How can we be saved? All of us became unclean and soiled. Even our good deeds are polluted. We have all withered like leaves, and our guilt carries us away like the wind. No one calls upon your name. There is none who clings to you, for you hid your face from us and delivered us into the hands of our sins. Yet you are our mother and father, Yahweh. You are the clay and we are the clay and you are the potter. We are the work of your hands. Don't let your anger go beyond measure, O God. Don't remember our sins forever, for we are all your people.
Thank you so much. 3rd Isaiah. This is a text that is written after the end of the Babylonian exile, after the people have returned. But the awareness of the exile, the calamity of the first temple being burned, of Jerusalem being conquered, of the line of Davidic kings being ended, and of the people having no idea who the next king could be because there's no record of who's even related to David at this point, gives this passage an apocalyptic tone. It's an expectation of a radical reversal of fortunes. People have abandoned the idea that they can help themselves because of the utter calamity of the exile. And their own means are no longer enough to save them. Their own armies will not win or conquer or defend them. Their only hope can come from God by divine intervention. This leads in the next chapter in 65 to the prophecy of a new heaven and a new earth, which is language that's echoed in Revelations. So this is an apocalyptic prophecy looking to say that everything around me, surrounding me, is rubbish. The only hope I have is for everything to be changed. But it should be noted that this new heaven, this new earth in the Isaiah passage is not the end of all time. It's not the complete reversal of things. It's said that in this new heaven and new earth, people still die. They live much longer. It's a recognition that creation can be perfected, not that it will be wiped away, not that all of the things that are familiar to us will be replaced. The general rules work the same, but they are bent toward our favor. That is what Isaiah is prophesying. The point in all of this is that when we look at prophecy, when we forget that prophets speak to their present time, when we look at prophecy as a prediction of the end times, when we look for our salvation in Jesus only happening in the distant future with the end of the earth, that we forget that we have a responsibility in the present, that we have hope in the present. Let's look at the next slide briefly. These are all the times that Christians use the ideas of end times and got it very wrong. And I stopped at the end of the slide. Oh my gosh, we could have gone on forever. The point is not for you to read these things. The point is just for us to be humbled and to remember how foolish we look as Christians every time that we took the Bible and its prophecy of the end time to be prediction that the world would actually end. We've gotten it wrong, because the fact that we're having this conversation today means the world hasn't ended yet. And as bad as things are, as horrible as climate change is, or the risk of another anarchic presidency, the world doesn't actually seem like it's going to end. Let's go on to the next slide. The point is, how do we find hope in an apocalypse? The texts for this week give us the end, and yet our job is to see a beginning. It's to understand, first of all, that apocalypses have been used by many of our more unscrupulous demagogues as means of control. How many times in the last 6 years have we heard of a political leader saying that if you don't elect me, everything will end? Apocalypses are means of control. Also remember that many of the people that are saying these things don't really care if the world ends or not in the next 15 to 20 years, because they're probably looking, given their lifespans, in the next 5 to 10 years. They know that people who are looking for their salvation at the end of time are less likely to be concerned about changing things in the present. And changing things in the present oftentimes means less power for the people that are preaching the end of time. It means that we might actually be concerned about how we take care of the environment now, because clean water and clean air are important now. It means that we might be more concerned about how wealth is distributed now. And people that tell us about the end of time would rather us be distracted, would rather us not think about how we are to be responsible now. This is a great book that I've got a cover of here, and it proposes that the correct way to understand apocalypse is not one of closure, but one of hope and openness. And she calls this counter-apocalypse, Catherine Keller. I'd like to propose that if we look at our experience from COVID, when people talked about the end of the world, about an apocalypse, that remember what the Greek origin of the word is. Apokalypso. It's about revealing. And so in Greek, the last book of the New Testament, what we translate as Revelations, is in Greek, the apocalypse of John. It's the revealing. It's an image of a curtain being drawn away. It's an opportunity for us to see clearly. And for many of us, COVID was tragic. People lost dear loved ones, children and elders. And for many of us, we had the opportunity to see our values more clearly. We spent time with family. We took care of each other. We shopped for each other. The apocalypse is not the end. It's an opportunity for us to see, for us to look at what is around us, for us to find hope in the present. So the message for the first week of Advent is to look at the end, but find the beginning. That's what I've got. Thank you.